Welcome back, CSE 235, to part 4 of our ex3, and part 4 will cover the JavaScript. And it won't be a whole lot of JavaScript, it'll be a little bit. So we'll try to wrap this up fairly quickly since we put a lot of time into the HTML and CSS. Now, this is a finished example, and I had another video early on where I looked at this, and I just want to point this out again, that after you fill it out and you hit submit, your finished product is just going to be your address displayed down here. Now, we're going to concatenate some elements since we're putting together first and last name. We're putting together the street name and a number if possible. If not, it won't show up. And then the city, state, and zip. And that's all we're going to do. And we'll move on from there and work with some other JavaScript topics such as loops and things like that. But for this, that's all we're going to do. So again, just to show it one more time, we do have some validation in here. Now we can use JavaScript validation, but there is form validation built into HTML so that if you move on to another one or you don't do anything, you try to hit submit, you can put required on some of these fields here. So that's pretty easy to do and it works pretty well. So I don't know if we have to get real deep into validation at this point. We can have alert windows through JavaScript come up when we don't put something, but since there are ways to catch things through HTML, we can do that. And we're going to run a function that's going to display our address information on a page. Now remember, we're not going to send it to another page right now. We're not sending it to a server. We're not doing anything back end. That would be back end, everything's front end. And it's dynamic because remember, the HTML looks like this now. And then when you check the HTML at the end, it's going to have new elements put in here through JavaScript. That's what JavaScript does. But it's still front end. It's not back end. Nothing's going to a server yet. Nothing's even going to another page. We're going to be preventing our form from doing that. So let's close this up and go back to our ex3. Now we are going to use W3 schools, and I'd recommend going to HTML, going down to HTML forms, because we are going to talk about forms a little bit more. We're going to be talking about form attributes, which are things like the action attribute, which will tell it what page to go to when it's done. Here's a page on a server, a PHP page that it'll go to that would process that information. That's what PHP does. It processes data and typically can put it into a database, but we're not going to do that right now, but you'll often see that action in there. We might just put a pound sign. I think that's all we have. You've seen the target attribute before. That makes it open up in a new window. We use that underscore blank. Method, this is good to know about. There's get and there's post. Typically post is more secure to use with a server. Get will actually embed the information into a URL. So if you see that, it's not quite as secure. So there's information here on it. Check it out. I'm not going to go through everything with you and point everything to look at, but look at the form attributes. We already looked at form elements, and also look at the input attributes, because that's where we'll see things like read only. There's a value so that there can already be something in there that's already displayed when you start. If I try it yourself here, you can see there's a name in there, which you may not want that, but there are times when you may want to have some default information in there. And there's disabled, there's size, and we can adjust size of the input field, which we did with CSS, but we can also do it with HTML. Max length and pattern. Pattern is something that's really nice because it can capture patterns of emails and dates and specific characters that should be in a certain order, just like an email should have something at something dot whatever. So that's something that could be in there that's built into HTML rather than having to use JavaScript to do that, although JavaScript does have validation to do that as well, but patterns built in there. And there's placeholder, there's required. We're going to use required so that if somebody doesn't fill in a field, we're going to put certain fields as required. And it'll just have its own kind of default message that'll come up. So that's something to check out in W3 schools. And let's go back to our form. I'm going to go back to the one I was working on, which was my CSE 235. And again, you don't have to have CSE on there, just 235 is fine, but it's my ex3. So I'm working on my ex3. And by the way, if you happen to have your console open down there, remember, just use the wrench to close it if you don't want that. I'm going to move this over. Well, actually, before I move it over, I'm going to open my page in a new tab, my preview, and then I'll move this over because I don't really need that over here. I'll keep this stuff open over here because I may want to jump back and forth. We are going to do a little bit of HTML because we have to put places where our information is going to show up. So we're going to have information showing up down below this form panel. So we'll put this down here and we'll try to keep it, I guess, the same width that it is there so we can borrow some of that. So let's build up our place of where it's going to go, and then we're going to start validating the information, and then we're going to put it on the page. So let's first put the information that's going to go on a page. So that'll be our index.html, and we're going to go down, 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 below our div, because remember this div, if you click on a div, you should see the starting div, or if you click on a starting div, you should see the closing div, and that's the form panel. So we want to go below form panel. So we'll just make another div, and we'll just put div # because that'll be an ID, and we'll put display. You could put display address, whatever, and we'll just put that. So that's going to be the div. So everything's going to be in here. That way we can make the div like the same width as the form panel. And what we'll put in there first is an H1. I'll just put H1 and I'll just give it an ID, call it headline. It's actually a good question. Why put an ID there? Because JavaScript is going to display the headline when we hit the button, not before. Otherwise, it would just be there before. So we are going to have to ID it. So I'll just do that. And we're not going to put anything in there yet because it would show up on the page. So we don't want anything here. And then we'll just put paragraphs, and we'll put P # full name, because we're actually going to put together the first and last name. Okay. And then after that, we're going to put P, so they go in another line, and then we'll do #, and we'll just put street-num, and I'll hit tab. So that'll be a place where the street, and if we have a number, apartment number, suite number, can go there. And then finally, the last one will be P, we'll put #. And again, we're using our Emmet shortcut here to do that. And we'll call it city-state-zip. Remember, these are not variables or anything like that. They're just IDs, so we can have dashes in there. But that's where we're going to put together the city, state, and the zip. And I'll hit tab. So everything will go in there, and we'll concatenate that so that we could put them all together so that everything doesn't have to be on a separate line. Now, we're just displaying that on a page. Obviously, if it was going in a database, we would have those all in separate columns. You would have a city column, a state column, a zip column, a street column, even the number. We would separate not the apartment number, but even like the whatever 123 Main Street that I had. The 123 would be in a street address, and then you would have the street, because there could be all different people living on that street. So if it was part of a database, you'd want to make sure that your number was different than your street, if that makes sense. And in your database, obviously, your last name and first name would be separate, because people would have the same first name, people have the same last name, and so on. But we're just kind of putting things together here. So that sets up what we have for our information to go. So that's, I think, all we have to do there. If we want to style it, we could go over to style.css, and we'll go above all our media queries here. And we could go below everything here, since it's kind of below everything. And our div is called display. So I'm going to use a #. We didn't use a class here, and it's wavy because there's nothing in it. And we're going to kind of borrow form panel. We'll just make it width 75%, and we'll put margin whatever percent auto. We'll do something like that. Let's just try that. We'll just copy that and use that for our address display. So I'll just paste that in there. We'll try that first. I have an extra space in here, it looks like. So we'll see how that looks once we display it. We can certainly tweak it later, but that's fine for now. So that will put an even amount of margin on either side if it's 75% wide. And again, it's a div, so it's a block element. So it should take up the page. Okay, so we have everything in place. Now we're going to do some JavaScript. Now what are we going to do? Well, we're actually going to make variables that represent the data to put them on the page, and then use an inner HTML to display it. So we have to get the data, and then we have to display the data. So two things are going to happen. So let's go to our JavaScript. And if you have anything here, get rid of it. Now what we're going to do is make variables. Let's look what we have here. Now remember, the IDs are going to be for contacting that. So we're going to be identifying our inputs by their ID name, which we already have. And information going in a database, we would use name. But what we're going to do is just get the value of this information. And what is the value? Well, the value is what anybody inputs. So we don't have the value yet. That's why we can't use one of these. It's going to be the value. That value is a property of what someone puts in there. So what we're going to do here is we're going to get the ID name of the information that they're putting in, which here it's going to be from the fields. And then we're going to be using the value from that. Now the name can be used for databases, but we're going to be using the value. So we're going to be using a property called .value when we get the information that someone has put in there, because we don't have it yet. So we got to get that value. So that's what we're going to do. Variables that represent the value of these IDs. So let's just start one, then we could copy paste. So let's go here, and we don't have to make a function yet. We could always make a function later, because I think we will need to make a function or to run a function when we click the button. That'll be easier. But for now, we'll just start off with let, and we'll use the same variable names as we are using for our names and ID names. So, F name, L name, street, number, city, state, very obvious things. So I'm going to put let F name equal or be assigned to, and then we're going to do document dot, look at that, it's working nice now, get element by ID. And the ID we're going to use is the same, it's the same name, but you got to put in quotes, F name. Then we have to put dot value because that's what we're getting when they put that information in the form. So this variable is going to represent the value of what goes into that ID. So once we get one of these, this is pretty easy. We're just going to copy and paste. And this will be L name. This will be L name. And no red wavy lines. And then what comes next? Then we have street. So we'll have street, ID street. We'll have, and I'm getting wavy lines here because they're duplicate. And remember, you can't put let for the same name twice. You have to, if you're going to reassign it, you take away let. And this will be street, and that's good. Moving quick here, and then we'll have number. I think I called it number, and another one I might have used num, but I'll just use number. And again, going back, you might think, oh, was that the address number? And this is just like a suite or apartment number that I'm using that for. So again, nothing too complex here. So that's just a suite or apartment number. And then after that, we have the city. Change this to city. And we'll do one more for state. And then we'll do one for zip. So check for any red wavy lines, anything that doesn't look right. Look down at these, look down at those so you don't have errors later. Okay, so these are variables. Now, what are we going to do with these variables? Well, we're going to display them on a page in our places that we have. Now, where is it going to be? Well, it's going to be in this area here. We have headline, where we can just display a headline. We don't have to get a value for that. We could just display a headline. We can have just a string that says address, your address. That's it. That'll be our H1 ID. But then we'll get full name, we'll get street num, and we'll get city, state, zip. You hear those birds? They're really loud. I apologize for those birds making all that noise. All right, so we'll go back here, and this will be putting information on a page. Now, how do we do that? Well, that's where we go document.getElement. Same thing. And remember, you can make variables that represent document.getElement by ID if you want, but for now, we'll just do that. And the first one is headline. We just called it headline. And spell it right and make sure if it's an ID, you put it in quotes. And we'll just put .inner HTML. That's coming up here. And we could just put equals. And we could just put a string. And we just put new address. So we don't have to do any kind of variable there or anything else. And again, put a semicolon at the end. So that's our line 1, which is just the headline. And then I'll just copy and paste that. The next one I think is full name. I think we put that together. Let me just check. Always check. Yeah, full name. So we have full name. And what's going to go in here? Well, we're going to concatenate the first name and last name. So we know how to do that. We're just going to put F name plus L name. Now, you know as well as me that right now if we did that, they would go together. So we're going to concatenate that with a space in the middle. Now you could use a non-breaking space or just one space. It's fine. So I'll do it like that. And I'll put spaces through there. If you want to take away the spaces on either side of the plus sign, you can, but keep this one here because that's our actual space. So if you want to save space, you can get rid of that. I don't know if that looks better or not, but it saves space. So there's our name, full name, and I'll copy that. And then we'll do street num, or number, I think. Let's check. Street num. I called it num when I had a dash in it, but otherwise it's number. So street num. And again, why do you check that? Because then you have an error and you're like, what's going on? Oh, I called it num there and I did it. That's why it's good to be consistent. Maybe better off doing num everywhere or number everywhere. But what we're going to do here is just have street, because remember it's a variable, so variables do not need the quote. And we couldn't even put a comma. Nah, we don't need a comma. It's just going to be street, because I think we have street is basically the number in the street. We didn't separate the address street, like 123 3rd Street. We put it all together. So street's going to be all together, and number is going to be only if there's an apartment number or something. So we'll put that number, and we'll just put a space in between. So that works just like first name and last name, 123 Main Street, apartment 3 would usually be on the same line. Sometimes that could be on a different paragraph. I'm putting it here so that if it doesn't show up, we don't have to have a blank space. below because it's a block element, so we'll put it on the same line. And then finally we'll put 3 together down here. I'll paste again, and we'll call it city state zip. We won't call it that. We already did call it that, but now we're targeting that. And this is going to be city. And now when you think of a city, you'd have a comma right after it, and then a space, and then state. And then you'd have another space, so I'll put plus, and I'll put a empty space in there. We have a comma space, then the state, and then we have a space, and then we have zip. So we'll finish off with zip. And again, that's the variable. So these are the variables that are showing up here. These are the areas we're getting them from. These are the areas they're going. So there should be 4 lines. One of them is a headline where it just says new address. Not new address, actually. It should just say your address. Sorry about that. Your address. So we have everything in place right now. So what we're going to do is just kind of see what happens. But one of the things we'll do is we'll use some of these required things. So we'll make sure that people put information in. So this is really easy. If you go to input attributes and you look at required, all you have to do is put required at the end. That's all you need. So let's just do that before we start testing this out. And we'll just put, remember, it's in the input field. So not the class field, which is the div. It's in the input area. So we're going to put required for first name, and we'll put required for last name. And remember to put a space there so it comes up as a different attribute. And for street, we'll require that. And for number, we will not require that because maybe you don't have an apartment number, because that's what that means there. So we're not going to require that. So if you leave blank, that's okay for this one. So this one could be blank. And for city, we'll require that. And for state, we'll go under here under select, and we'll put required. You don't have to put them by the option. You just put them by the select statement. So that'll handle our drop down. So I think we're good with everything here. Oh no, we didn't have zip. So we want to require zip. So let's go down here and require zip. And there's our zip. So we should have everything in place right now. Now, right now, nothing's going to happen when we submit that button. Well, I don't know. Let's see what's going to happen. Let's try to fill it out. Okay, let's refresh. Actually, before we refresh, do we have a script? No. So nothing's going to go to script.js because we're not linking to it. So I don't care what you do. Now you could go here and hit submit, and it is doing these things because that's all HTML, but nothing's going to happen even if you fill it out. I'll just put my name here, Alpha, New Jersey. I don't know what it is, 07883. I don't have no idea. And it's kind of doing something, and let's see. Now here's the method. It's actually putting it in your URL up there, but it's not doing anything. It's not displaying anything on a page. And there's a couple reasons for that. Let's just refresh this. One is we're not even connecting to the script. There's just a script here, and your index page does not have it. Or maybe you do have it, but I don't. So before the end of body, I'm going to put a script tag. And we'll just type script and hit tab. And it's going to be looking for a source. Now, it didn't put source in here when I did that. So I should put script src for source, not ser. So script source equals, and put quotes. And then that's going to be, and it's coming up right here, script.js. It's coming up in the dropdown. So that's all you need. That's going to be running the script. So now we're linked up to script.js. As long as you spell it right. If you spell it wrong, it's not going to work. Or if it's in a folder or something, it won't work. But this is all loose in the main directory. So let's see what happens now. I'll just try one more time. We'll just kind of build up here, put my names together, see if it does anything. I don't know if it will, because I don't know if it'll know to do that, if it'll know to execute the script when I hit submit or not. So let's see. 1, 2, 3. And this would be main street. And I'll hit submit. Now it's starting to put stuff in here, but it's only putting select in there. So it's not really getting the information. It's doing something. But let's make sure we put this in a function so that when we submit this, it actually happens, because it's not using any of this information here. So what we'll do is we'll put it in a function for now, and that's easy enough. We'll highlight all this stuff. Now this doesn't really have to be in the function, but we'll put it all in the function for now. We'll just highlight it all and hit tab. Now remember, you don't have to do that. It's not required, but it looks a lot better. And I'll tab that over, and we'll do the function keyword and a space, and we'll give it a name. I'll call it display address, and we'll put parentheses there. We don't have any argument in there, but we still need the parentheses. And I need to get this closing curly brace and cut it and put it at the end of everything. And what we want to have happen is that this function will be called when the submit button happens. So we're going to use something called onSubmit, and you could even use onClick or whatever, but we're going to use onSubmit because we have a form. So we're going to go to here, or we could even do an add event listener onClick, and we could run it, or we can do it in here. So we'll try both ways. I'll put in here. I'll put onSubmit. See what happens here. I'll put onSubmit equals, and then in quotes, we're going to put the function name. The function name is display address, and pretty sure we need the parentheses. Let's put them in there. So there's our function that should run when we submit the form on submit, because we have it functioning as a submit. Even though we don't have type submit, it should recognize it as a submit button. If not, we'll have to troubleshoot that, because there is an input submit. We're just using a button here, but we'll see what happens. It's the only button in that form right now. So let's check out our JavaScript, and let's see if it does this, or if we have something screwed up. So let's refresh this, and let's put in a name, and there it is. It worked. We have our name, we have our street, we have our state, city, zip. If we put in a number, it doesn't show up. It just ignores it. And if we don't put anything in, if we just move on to here and hit submit or forget something, we're going to get these messages here, even if we don't use the select. So I'm going to stop there now because this is working. We can certainly do more things with it. And one of the things I wanted to do is work on using JavaScript to actually run through a loop and put all the states in there instead of trying to make option value for 50 states. Because if we had to do that, if we go back here, we'd have to put all that stuff in this dropdown. We'd have to have 50 option values with all the states. Now you can do that, and that's fine, because either way you're going to have a list somewhere. There's no just magical list. You'd have to have an array and then run a loop, but that may be helpful to learn how to do that if you want to dynamically create a loop that does that, so you don't have all this extra HTML code. You'd have to look at the pros and cons of what's best about that. So again, let's just review. The only style we did here was for display. That was just to make it be the same width as our form panel. For our index, all we did was this part at the end. We added a new div with basically 4 lines inside the div, and we had IDs to identify those parts, and they were new IDs. We didn't use the same ones because these new IDs are putting together some variables. So these are putting together the new information in paragraphs, and then we have our link to our JavaScript. Remember, it's src and not scr. It's not script. We already have script, so it's script source. So that's all we have in our HTML. And then in our script, this was pretty easy. Since we're using those required elements, those input attributes, we're not using any if else and if you don't fill it in and if that. We didn't use pattern, anything like that. We can keep building on this. But for now, we have our function running, and it's running on submit. And it's using that particular function right now, which we have indicated up here in our form. We have our form action. We really just have an anchor or ID kind of pound sign there, and then on submit equals display address, and we do use the parentheses in there, and it's in quotes, so that's running the function, and it's displaying it on a page. So we're not going to a server, we're not going to another page, we're not even validating anything with JavaScript right now. We can do the same thing, but we use the easy way first. We could validate things and make if-else statements and put a little warning sign on the page if you didn't put something in there. But if we have that built in with required, we can do that for now. So that's what we did when we didn't put anything in there. So if you hit submit, we get these little fields here. Now, how they work from browser to browser, you'd have to check out. So that's the end of ex3 right now, and that's part 4, and hopefully that didn't take too long, so that'll kind of wrap this up. And we're going to do some loop stuff with JavaScript, and then we'll dig into maybe Bootstrap a little bit, and then we'll get more into server-side work that we're going to try to work on. So that'll be coming up. But anyway, this should finish up ex3 for now. We may add some other things to it. We'll give them different ex names. So this is ex3 the JavaScript. It'll be a different assignment, but should be pretty quick and easy to finish up.